Would you ask Mr. Reason to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Reason, are you ready to carry on?
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, Mr. Reason. I just wanted to just explore briefly a couple of things that we covered before the break. First, in the answer that you gave before the lunch break, you referred to Policy 120, Policy Note 120.
Yes.
And you did say in that there's no specific guidance in that policy or anywhere else that gives an incident commander a specific criteria against which they would make a decision to consider partial or full evacuation of a tower block, a residential block. That's right, isn't it?
I did say that, yes.
Yes, just to be absolutely clear, can we look at Policy Note 120? Because I want to be clear with you what I'm going to put to you, which is that it does not cover evacuation of occupants of a high-rise residential block. It's at LFB 50701, and the title, LFB 50701, and the title of this policy note is Phased Evacuation of Office Buildings, and it was issued in February 1991 and reviewed as current in November 2015. As you can see, it is about office buildings. If you go down to page 6 of this document, you can see that there's paragraph 6.7, implement actions as per policy number 633, high-rise firefighting. Am I right in thinking that that is the only reference in the text of this policy to high-rise firefighting more generally than in the context of an office building?
Yes, I would accept that. There is a mention of high-rise somewhere in this document, but I accept it's more akin to not a non-residential high-rise building.
Yes, and indeed, this policy actually covers low-rise and high-rise office buildings.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Secondly, can I just show you something in LFC Rowe's second witness statement to the inquiry at LFB 30838834. LFB 30838834. I'll just show you the first page of that. It's his witness statement to the inquiry of December 2019. And if you go, please, to page 7, you can see that at the foot of the page, he deals with the LFB's understanding of stay put. And on page 8, we go to, in fact, I'd like to look at the question at the foot of page 7. Forgive me. If we go to the question at the foot of page 7, he's asked this. In paragraph 21, you state, and that's back to his first witness statement, the LFB openly recognises that there are no clear parameters in its policies and training for when and how a stay-put strategy should be disapplied and what alternative strategies should be put in place. For the avoidance of doubt, this is the question to him, please confirm if it is your evidence that there is no explicit guidance or direction at all in the LFB's policies, training or any other source of information as to when and how stay-put should be withdrawn and what alternative strategies should be implemented in that event. So that was the question he was posed. And let's look at the answer he gives over on page 8. He says this, I confirm that at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, that was the position. Whilst our policies explicitly recognised that the stay-put strategy and advice may need to be withdrawn, paragraphs 745 to 747 of Policy Note 633, that's high-rise firefighting, and paragraph 8.7 of Policy Note 790, I think that's incident command. We recognise that we had not provided explicit guidance as to when and how it should be withdrawn, and the alternative strategies which should be implemented, save for the explicit reference to partial or full evacuation. I also explained the difficulties associated with evacuation, in quotation marks, and that the LFB has reflected upon this as an organisation. We recognise that we did not have contingency planning in place for situations where a stay-put strategy is no longer tenable for an entire building. My question, Mr. Reason, is that correct?
I would agree with the majority of that answer, yes.
What would you disagree with?
It's more sort of nuanced. That just remind the inquiry of my answer just before the break, lunch break, about the difference between evacuation and rescue. So we're talking about stay put here specifically in the context of evacuation. And as you recall, my interpretation of evacuation, and that's my understanding when I was working as well, it's a sort of a managed process that is used as a precautionary measure to reduce the risk to members of the public, mostly. When stay put needs to be revoked, obviously you're requiring the individual members of the public who are making the fire survival call to make their own way out of the premises. That's why you'd make that assessment. They may be assisted, but they may not be assisted by fire office personnel. So it's really just a nuanced thing. Is that the point you probably would change the stay put guidance is you're probably into either what I would describe as a mass rescue or a search and rescue operation, rather than a sort of pre-planned evacuation strategy. It's becoming a rescue operation at that point.
But equally, isn't it correct, as the Commissioner says here, that as at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, there was no guidance, at least no explicit guidance, as to how and when stay put should be withdrawn and the alternative strategies that should be implemented?
Not specifically for a residential high-rise building, no.
No. Right. Can we then go back, please, to the training guide we were looking at for Holcroft House before the break? And that is at BAB 6011. And I'd like to go back to page 69, which is where we left off. We left off at the very point where we were considering together the consideration of partial or full evacuation of the block. And I think you accepted that there's nothing in the training on what it was that a candidate should consider or should note, which would prompt consideration of a partial or full evacuation of the block.
Yeah, from what I've seen in this document, I can't see where that's been introduced, no.
No. In general, and I detect that you're not familiar with the document, so you may not know the answer to this, but did the training proceed on the basis that Holcroft House was a block with a stay-put policy in place?
I could guess, but I don't know specifically because I'd say I wasn't involved in it.
Right. More generally, so far as you were involved in the development and detail of the command decision exercises or incident command training more generally for high-rise firefighting, was it generally the working assumption that all residential high-rise buildings should be approached on the basis that they had a stay-put policy in place?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment that at the time of my period as director and before as an operational commander, that, yeah, I think it was well understood that stay-put policy for residential high-rise probably was the default position unless there was specific evacuation procedures developed by the responsible person.
Right. Now, can we please turn on to page 76? Here we can see the 10th inject, page 76 of this document. Yes, thank you. Here we can see inject number, crew manager, watch manager 10, yes? And then there are some performance criteria. And then in the box you can see inject 10. As incident commander, you receive information from the bridgehead that the fire is actually on the 4th floor and has spread from building debris in the communal hallway to at least one flat on the 4th floor. In addition to a large quantity of debris left in the hallway, apparently by the renovation contractor, the flat is now 50% alight. Take it from me, if you would, that there's nothing else in this document, either before or after this inject, that refers to fire spread. Now, against the backdrop of the Lacknell House fire, particularly its rapid external fire spread affecting a number of floors in that building, do you accept that that was a failure here to train firefighters on the extent of the risk posed by external fire spread and poor compartmentation?
If this indeed was the final command decision-making exercise that was mentioned in the response to the Rule 43, then that didn't convey what we'd intended in terms of fire spread. I mean, it does talk about fire spread, but it looks like more internal compartment, and fire loading within the hallway is the focus in this inject.
And nor did it address the risks posed by external panelling.
It doesn't appear to, from what I've seen so far. No, it doesn't.
No. Nor rapid external fire spread.
No.
No. And to that extent, would you agree that this training exercise did not in substance meet the coroner's 7 incident command recommendations?
If this is indeed the one that was produced and not a different version, Blackwall Tower springs to mind, yes, I accept that this doesn't convey a response to the Rule 43, sorry.
Thank you. Now, let's turn to a slightly different topic, one which I think you've referred to before, which is the Babcock Incident Command Course Review process. Now, we've looked at a number of documents so far in your evidence, Mr. Reason, which would suggest that the coroner's 7 incident command recommendations would also be fed into Babcock's incident course review of incident command training. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, we've looked at the update in the TCAP 0124 form, which said that following the TCAP, the recommendations would be made for further enhancements that would be fed into the incident course review.
Yeah, I accept that.
Incident command course review, yes. Now, we also, I think, confirmed that you were the chair of the course review board, weren't you?
I was.
Yes. Now, if we go then against that background to this document, LFB 30043552, we can see that this is Babcock's initial programme course review report.
Yes, I recognise that.
Yes, July 2013. And its full title is Initial Programme Course Review, IPCR Stage 2 Report, Incident Management Training. And the report's date on the front cover, as you can see, is July 2013. But if we go to LFB 30733973, in fact, we see that the email which covered the production of this which covered the production of this report, was actually dated 27th of October 2014. This is an email from Doug Massey of Babcock to Phil Butler, enclosing the document, PDF glossy with photos, etc. And it appears that there were different drafts and discussions of this report between July 2013 and October 2014 when it was finalised. I can take you to some detail of that if you want to, but does that accord with your recollection generally?
Yes, my recollection is the previous document, the 2013 version, although it doesn't say draft, I was given an early copy just to sort of get a feel for the approach. I think this was the first document I'd seen that was the outcome of a course review, and it was just, I think, for Babcock's purposes to get a feel whether they were going in the right direction, and the sort of scope and intention and the style of document was what we were expecting. Right.
So although the document bears the date July 2013, it wasn't finalised, is this right, until October 2014?
From memory, and I have checked the course review board minutes, I don't think we formally took the incident command review report at that board. I may be wrong, but I don't remember it. I remember seeing it, but I don't remember taking it at the board.
Right. Now let's go back to the report. Can we go first, please, to page 12? I want to pick up the references in it to Lakenal House. And on page 12, the first reference to Lakenal House we see is in the left-hand column under 6.1 historical context. If you cast your eye down your screen, and we now need to scroll down to the bottom half of the page, you can see that there is a paragraph that starts since 1991. Can you see that?
Yes.
And it says this: since 1991, there have been other notable events which have further influenced incident management training, including Bethnal Green, July 2004, 2 London firefighter fatalities; Harrow Court, February 2005, 2 Hertfordshire firefighter and 1 resident fatalities; Aphiston on Stour in November 2007, 4 Warwickshire firefighter fatalities; Lakenal House, Camberwell in July 2009, 6 resident fatalities; Shirley Towers in April 2010, 2 Hampshire firefighter fatalities. Now, as I've shown you, Lakenal House is the 4th in that list there. Noting that, and we'll come back to Atherstone in a moment, the second reference to Lakenal House is on page 30. If we look at page 30, we see an appendix to this document, which is entitled Stage 1 Incident Management Review Output Document, you see? And if
Yes,
you go to the
yeah.
bottom of page 32, 2 pages into Appendix 1, we can see that there's a row headed Political Considerations. Can you see at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen?
Yes, I can see that.
And in the middle it says this: corporate responsibility for managing the health and safety of employees whilst at work is a statutory requirement. Failure to meet and maintain these statutory obligations exposes the fire authority to the risk of legal action. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
And then over the page, if you go over to page 33, towards the bottom of that row, it includes a list of current issues for consideration, the first bullet point of which says this: the outcome of the Lacknell House inquest and Rule 43 letter to the LFB. Now, those are the only 2 references in this document that we've seen to the Lacknell House fire and the subsequent inquest and the Rule 43 recommendations from it. You're familiar with this document, I assume. Would I be right about that?
I read it at the time, yes.
Do you agree that there's nothing in the report, certainly as of October 2014, to indicate that the coroner's 7 incident command recommendations had been substantially incorporated into or considered by the incident command course review?
I don't recall seeing the later version of this. I may well have seen it, but I don't recall seeing it, so I can only base it on what I would call the early draft in 2013. And
Right.
I accept that there was no specific detail about the Rule 43 recommendation, just a passing reference to it.
No, you refer to the early draft in 2013. That's about a year or so before the final review report was issued. Take it from me, I think this is the final version. Looking at the October version, that is at LFB 30's71968. And this is a string of emails in October 2013. If we go to the second email down in the chain, it's from you on the 8th of October 2013 to James Dalgleish and Peter Groves. And the subject, Initial Programme Course Review, IPCR Stage 2 Report, Incident Management Training at 7th October 13. So this is the year before the document we've just seen. James and Peter, please find attached my OBS and revisions relating to the Incident Command Course Review document. In summary, I don't have any major issues with the direction of travel being proposed by Babcock, but I'm still struggling to see how we move forward in terms of designing and delivering some of the new courses. The idea of a joint working group appears to be the most pragmatic and sensible way to progress these course reviews, and it's clear we now need a discussion on how to make this work, both for the Brigade and Babcock. Why did you not take the opportunity in October 2013 to highlight the fact that the Rule 43 recommendations needed to be woven into this review?
I can't specifically making an active decision to not put it in. Maybe I just didn't consider it, given it was at a draft, and I knew that there was other work going on, and this wasn't the final iteration. But it just didn't, from memory, it didn't cross my mind. But it certainly wasn't an active decision on my part to not put it in.
So would it follow that you took no steps at all as director with responsibility for the training and the course review board, and also for implementation of the coroner's incident command recommendations, to ensure that those recommendations lay at the heart of Babcock's review of incident command training?
Well, it would be one of, absolutely, I agree, it would be one of the considerations, but it was much broader. This review was across the whole of the incident command curriculum, not just those issues relating to the Lacknell House fire.
Well, quite, but I'm not suggesting that the review was only related to the issues coming out of the Lacknell House fire. What I'm suggesting to you is that you failed to weave into this course review the specific Rule 43 recommendations about incident command that the coroner had made.
Yes, in that context, I didn't put them in.
Yes, I just want to know why that is, if you can tell us.
I can't recall actively making a decision to put it in or leave it out. I just probably didn't come to my attention when I was reviewing the document, which, as I say, was an early draft, and I was reading it in the context. This was the first course review report I'd seen from Babcock, and I think the reason I got an early copy was to give some feedback more about style and approach rather than specific content. I mean, I did read it, obviously, and I think this email supports that assertion, but I don't think I was crawling over it line by line and checking that every single bit of incident command training was covered by this document.
Well, even if you weren't crawling it over it line by line, why didn't you get somebody in your organisation to do that, given that that was ultimately something for which you were ultimately responsible?
Well, I think if, and you may be able to help me with this in a minute, if this did come to the course review board, then a much wider group of officers, and you know the constituent members of the course review board, other than James and Peter Groves, would have seen this document, and I would have then taken, we'd have had a discussion about the document itself and what it contained, and then we would have fed back formally to Babcock whether that was going to be accepted as their final iteration. But I don't recall it formally being taken at the course review board in 2014. Whether it subsequently came to that board, assuming that board continued after I retired, I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid, sorry.
Well, no, and you of course retired in January 2015, and it's right to think that the Incident Command course review remained incomplete as at that time, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yes. Are you aware of any changes to the LFB's Incident Command training being implemented, whether in response to the Latin recommendations or otherwise, before your retirement?
In respect, there was a lot of training delivered in that period.
Well, there were tweaks to existing training you've described before, but other than those?
I think there was more than tweaks. We published, and this isn't all involved Babcock, because some of it predates Babcock. In 2011, we published a new high-rise procedure which took account of the issues that had been identified through the Lakenhall House investigation. I'm pretty certain that had a training support package and it was published through the operational news. There was other aspects of those 7 criteria in the Rule 43 recommendation, like search and rescue. We published a brand new policy around search and rescue, and that subsequently had a training support pack developed and was published through Ops News. And there was new equipment and numerous operational policy updates to reflect what we'd learned from Lakenhall. So I don't accept there was no training, but obviously the TCAP we're referring to and this course review was not concluded before I retired.
You referred to new high-rise procedure in 2011. Is that the new 633? 633.
Yes, I believe after the Lakenhall House fire, before the generic risk assessment was updated, which didn't get published till 2014, the Brigade Operational Policy Department, and that was before I was director, but I know this happened, so it's a fact, that a new 633 policy, as soon as we knew enough about Lakenhall that we were confident that we could put that into an updated high-rise policy, we published, and that became a station support training pack.
Now, after your retirement, do you know who adopted or took over the position of Director of Operations, Resilience and Training?
Yes, I do. That was James Dalgleish on an interim basis.
Right. Did you have any form of handover as between you and James Dalgleish?
Yes, I had an extensive handover for James. He was working in my directorate anyway, was obviously aware of a lot of the Babcock issues and training issues because that was his reference, and I gave him a very comprehensive handover in the months leading up to my retirement.
Right. In the months leading up to it, how did this handover take place? Did you have meetings with him, or did he sit with you and gradually take over your role? How did it work?
A bit of all of that. James was a standing member of Corporate Management Board, so he was cited on a lot of the organisational issues that were beyond my directorate at that time. We had regular one-to-one meetings, and there was a succession of meetings in the lead up to me leaving the organisation where I went through all of the work streams, projects in my directorate and all the other work that he would needed to be aware of that didn't already sit within his own department. And I'd like to think it was a very comprehensive handover.
Did you have did your handover specifically focus on the Incident Command course review, which he took over from you?
No, because as I said, I don't believe the document had formally come. He would have been aware that, obviously, because I've sent him emails about it, and he would have been aware because of his relationship with Babcock and his role within the organisation that there were a whole raft of course reviews scheduled. We did have a programme of when those course reviews were going to be published and when they would come to the course review board, and he sat on the course review board, so he would have been aware of all of that.
Now, I just want to ask you some final questions on incident command and training. You told us, I think, that the LFIPA Strategy Committee received 2 updates on the work of the Lacknell House Working Group, one in November 2013 and one in July 2014.
That's correct.
Yes. And now you've exhibited your July 2014 report to your witness statement, which I think we saw yesterday. Let's go back to it. It's at NFB 30677819. NFB 67819. Yes, and we looked yesterday, I think, at the front page and saw that it was drafted by the Deputy Commissioner, Rita Dexter, and by you.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, if we go to paragraph 3 on page 2, under the heading LHWG Work Programme, you can see that it says this: at the inaugural meeting of the LHWG, 24th July 2013, the following work programme was agreed, and there are 6 bullet points. The first of which is ongoing updates on the Rule 43 Action Plan, and the 4th is Incident Command. Yes. That's, I think, the only mention of Incident Command in this document. Is it correct that this report was intended to bring the Strategy Committee up to speed with the work of the Lacknell House Working Group?
I think it was, we were asked to produce this report by the Lacknell House Working Group or the Strategy Committee. I can't remember which way around it was. When the members of the Lacknell House Working Group felt they'd exhausted the issues and obviously the work programme that we put forward to them and worked with them on. So it was purely a kind of I think it was a governance process. It was formally opened, this Lacknell House Working Group, by the Fire Authority, which said they would obviously create the Lacknell House Working Group and it would report to the Strategy Committee. And then when the members of the Lacknell House Working Group felt they'd concluded their work, then we'd obviously take a report to close down the Lacknell House Working Group just for completeness and for governance purposes. I don't think it was ever intended to go sort of rehearse all of the information that had been at the Lacknell House Working Group, just to give a flavour of the overview of the themes that have been researched and developed through that.
Right. Well, let's go and see what we can see. If we go back to page 1, please, we can see the summary. And the summary it says it's the final update to the Strategy Committee detailing the work that's been initiated and progressed by the Lacknell House Working Group. And you can see the 2 recommendations underneath that the work be noted, and secondly, that this group be agreed as the formal conclusion of the work of the Lacknell House Working Group. So that was the intention behind this report, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Yes. Now, we've also, I think, established and agreed together that the Lacknell House Working Group was intended to report its findings and recommendations to the LFIPA Strategy Committee. Given that context, can you explain to us why you didn't explain to the Strategy Committee that the work was still continuing in relation to the LFB's incident command actions for Rule 43 purposes and had not been completed at that date?
Again, similar answer to one I gave earlier after lunch is, again, it wasn't an intention not to include any information deliberately to mislead members. I'd certainly refute that. I think elected members on all of the committees are a different constituency of audience when you're writing these types of report. They generally, other than a few exceptions, were less interested in the granular level of kind of operational procedures, policy and training. They wanted to get a sense of the overview of the direction of travel of the brigade. So certainly reports written to members were looked and felt and contained different information than reports that were written for operational and internal colleagues. I know that probably doesn't quite answer your question, but that may explain in part why these reports to elected committees and the full Fire Authority contain less granular detail than the internal reports.
Well, granular or not granular, you were giving the impression, weren't you, through this report to the Strategy Committee, that the work of the Lacknell House Working Group was done when it wasn't?
Well, that's what the words say. I mean, the Lacknell House Working Group would have made that assessment themselves. At the point they felt they'd exhausted the programme of work which we set out at the beginning at the inaugural meeting, a few items were added during the lifetime of the Lacknell House Working Group. We certainly wouldn't have been allowed to close down the Lacknell House Working Group. It's a member working group, so officers attended it in their capacity as advisors to that particular committee. It was the committee itself, the Lacknell House Working Group, the chair and the two other members that worked on it, that chose to decide based on information we'd given them and the information they'd seen, that they felt that they had concluded the work as originally intended by this particular working group. It wasn't officers recommending to close down the working group. It was the elected members were satisfied with themselves that they had concluded what the working group had originally set out to achieve.
Yes, well, you put your finger on it, if I may say so. They made the decision based on the information you had given them and the information they'd seen. That's right, isn't it?
That is correct.
Yes, but the working group's decision was entirely based on what you told them through your monitoring reports and your incident command development report.
And they obviously other presentations and people that attended the meetings over the life of that group, yes.
So their decision was only going to be as good as the information they had.
Yes, I accept that.
And if it was incomplete, then the decision was made on an incomplete basis.
From memory, I don't think they were obviously clearly interested in the Rule 43. That was one of the catalysts for this working group. But the work of the group was much wider than just the coroner's ruling. And I think at some point, I mean, for a fact that some of these actions went on until 2016. Before they were finally closed off and the TCAP was signed as complete. I can't believe that the Lacknell House Working Group would have stayed operational over that whole period. They would have satisfied themselves that the Brigade had the appropriate level of governance and assurance in place, which would have been through the ODCB, as you know, because the same, or a slightly different version of the same update went to ODCB. So I can't remember specifically, and I don't think we had this conversation, but my sense is that they would have been satisfied that if they closed down the Lacknell House Working Group, the Rule 43 wouldn't just disappear into a black hole and there was no governance to check that it was being progressed and assured, and they would have satisfied themselves that the ODCB was the appropriate level to manage that work going forward, and that they'd satisfied themselves they concluded the work of the working group.
Did the conclusion of the Lacknell House Working Group at this time, mid-July 2014, and this report to the Strategy Committee mean that the LFIPA no longer had any scrutiny over the LFB's progress as against the coroner's 7 incident command recommendations?
At that level of detail, yes, I believe that was true. That didn't stop members obviously asking for information if they wanted it, but we didn't provide a proactive report to members or wasn't required to at that time.
So the formal structure of reporting to up to the Strategy Committee was essentially terminated before the Rule 43 recommendations in relation to incident command had been fully carried into effect.
That is correct.
Did you or anybody else ever seek to update the coroner to explain that as of December 2013 and onwards, the deadline hadn't been met and the changes to training had not yet been carried into effect?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
It never occurred to me to update the coroner. We'd responded, obviously, with the original response. And to be honest, I didn't know if there was even a process to update coroners at some future date.
Now, we heard from Peter Groves that the new incident command courses started to be delivered in 2016, and that was when the Holcroft House exercise was used. That's when it became live. When you retired in January 15, was it a concern to you that the incident command courses, which addressed the Lacknell Rule 43 recommendations, had not yet been rolled out to personnel?
In relation to the command decision-making exercises, yes, but I refer to my earlier answer. I did believe that some of the existing high-rise command decision-making exercises had been updated because they weren't new training from scratch. They were sort of amendments to existing training. I was aware that this particular Hull Cross House, or I believed it was Blackwall Tower actually, but that there was another significant brand new package that was on its way but hadn't been delivered before I retired.
Did it not concern you? Were you not concerned that the urgency with which this was supposed to be addressed was not being observed?
Yes, so there was always a concern about the speed in which not just this training but other training in certain curriculars was taking. I think Peter Groves covered this in some of his evidence, and I was doing my best with Babcock at a strategic director level to try and resolve some of these issues. And I've given you one example, which was the offer of Group Manager Phil Butler to assist Babcock in this particular field of expertise.
Did you yourself, in your position as DOORT, take any action to expedite these training packages?
Not specifically, because I think the blockage, to use a clumsy term, was around that expertise, and it was about 3 months before I retired, I think, that Group Manager Phil Butler returned to the Brigade, and that's when we seconded him into operational assurance with the view that he would also straddle the Babcock design team for incident command.
Did anybody think of going to LFIPA and telling them 6 months, 9 months after the Lacknell House working group was terminated, that there was a blockage with expediting the command decision exercises because you couldn't get the expertise?
No, I didn't consider doing that. As I've said before, the TDEs, the CDEs are a component of a suite of training that we made available to staff in the aftermath of the Lacknell House fire. So yes, I accept it's not immediate as it was described in the TCAP or urgent, but if there had been a complete absence of training, that yes, of course we'd have escalated that. I would have been directly involved in that because of the health and safety risks to that. But I was satisfied that there was a body of training going on that was addressing some, if not most, of the Rule 43s, and these CDEs and TDEs packages were just another tool in the toolbox, so to speak, that would come online to support that already quite rich body of training that we were doing.
The rich body of training that you were doing was really just existing exercises which had enhancements, tweaks to them.
Yeah, a refocus of existing training materials to cover those 7 items in the Rule 43, yes.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to turn to a different topic, which is training on external fire spread and something called the highly insulated buildings package. See what you can help us with on that. Can we start with LFB 00121125, please? This is an email from you to Danny Cotton, Graham Ellis and Dr. Adrian Bevan on the 12th of November 2014.
Yes, I've read that.
And you've read it, and I'm going to assume you're familiar with it.
I am familiar with it.
Others may not be quite so quick. Please, you say, Danny and Graham, please find attached the final report detailing the lessons learnt from the Aphiston on Stour incident. Warwickshire FRS is keen that other brigades are made aware of the content of the report, so I've attached the learning points detailed in the main report that runs to over 80 pages. NB, the full report, can be accessed on the WFRS website. Not surprisingly, you will see many parallels with the issues that have emerged from other incidents such as Harrow Court, Shirley Towers, Lacknell, and our own SAI outcomes. From my own review, I think that we are already cited and progressing many of the issues detailed in the report. However, you will see from the extracts from the BRE Global Report, pages 75 to 77 refers, that there are some themes that may be worthy of inclusion in future IMPD reports to ODCB. Now, the full report is at INQ 30147765. I'll just pull that up and show it to you. There it is. It's the report on the fire at Aphiston on Stour, 2nd of November 2007.
Yep.
And just to be clear for everybody, Aphiston-on-Stour is in Warwickshire, and WFRS, is it right, is Warwickshire Fire and Rescue Services?
That is correct.
Right. So there it is. The extracts that you attach to the email are at LFB 00121126. And here are the learning points. You see that? Now, first of all, do you recall the email?
Yes, I recall the email.
And you recall the extract?
Yes.
Right. Now, just as a bit of background, it's right, I think, that the Aphiston-on-Stour fire in 2007 involved a fire in a vegetable packing warehouse.
Yes, it did.
Where the fire spread beyond the compartment of origin.
Yes, it did.
And is it that made you compare, or drew you to compare it to Lacknell House, Shirley Towers and Harrow Court?
That, amongst other features of the fire, significantly, obviously, the death of 4 firefighters was uppermost in my mind. It was something that I professionally would do anyway, is when there was other reports on fatal fires, of this nature, I would always try and familiarise myself with the reports that were coming out or coroner's recommendations, and then ask my ops assurance team to benchmark ourselves against any of these issues. As I said in the covering email you've shown earlier, I felt from reading this that we were pretty much covered on most issues, because there was not anything significantly different, although the type of fire was different obviously to Lacknell and other fires we'd had, but almost like a belts and braces, I wanted just to go through that process, and as you saw in my email, if there were any concerns from the operational assurance department, then bring that through the normal reporting process to ODCB.
Now, you say in that answer that you felt from reading this that we were pretty much covered on most issues. When you say we were pretty much covered, do you mean from the point of view of health and safety, your health and safety obligations to your employees?
I think more in the context, I mean, ultimately that was my job, but I think in terms of these bullet points on this page that's up at the moment, these are the things that you'll see the similarity to some of the things that you've seen elsewhere in evidence relating to Lacknell House and probably other fires. So that's probably what I meant more, that there was nothing in here that sort of jumped out that we either wasn't cited on or we weren't, in my opinion, progressing at that time.
Let's look at page 3 of this document. And under the heading, it's at the very top of the page, and easy to miss, fire safety and building construction knowledge. Can you see?
Yes, I can.
It says, post-incident investigation highlighted that some of the fire safety features of the warehouse were incomplete, and some of these features influenced fire development. There was also a lack of understanding of modern methods of building construction by many of the operational crews. The learning point is that operational crews should be able to recognise the fire safety features and wider construction methods used in modern building to identify potential hazards and safety features. And then it goes on, identification of sandwich panels. The presence of sandwich panels in the part of the building affected was not widely recognised at the incident. The 3 types of construction used in the premises had been clad with the same material of the same colour, which made recognition in the dark problematic. The national guidance available highlighted the need to identify the presence of sandwich panels, although it did not provide guidance on the method of identification. The learning point is that national guidance should clarify a consistent and practical method for identifying the presence and type of sandwich panels used within buildings. See also national ventilation work finished over leaf.
Yeah, I read that.
Now, you said in your covering email that you considered the LFB to be already cited and progressing many of the issues detailed in the report. We saw that email.
Yes.
Was that true of operational personnel being familiar with sandwich panels and other modern construction methods and materials, or was that one of the areas that you considered the LFB could learn from?
Well, we'd certainly had in around 2007 and 8, we'd had a range, a number of high-profile commercial buildings where sandwich panels really first came to prominence, and the difficulty for firefighters and commanders is they burn fiercely, as we all know, and they are collapse very quickly once they're involved in fire. So in the context of this particular report, as you said, it was a food packing warehouse, i.e. a commercial premises. And so in terms of this particular conclusion, I would have felt that for commercial buildings, we were fairly well cited. There was certainly publications in operational news, and I think there is a station training support pack which specifically covers sandwich panels in use in commercial premises.
Yes. Now, you focused on the part on the screen which relates to sandwich panels. I'm interested in the more general passage immediately above it, where the learning point is that there is a, quote, lack of understanding of modern methods of building construction by many of the operational crews. Learning point is that operational crews should be able to recognise the fire safety features and wider construction methods used in modern building to identify potential hazards and safety features. I've read that again because I want to refocus you on it. Was that one of the issues on which you consider the LFB already to be cited and progressing?
No, I don't believe it was.
No.
I didn't think of it in that context. No.
No, and therefore was that something that you took forward, knowing that you weren't covering it, that you then wanted to see in policy and training?
I didn't explicitly express that in the email which you've seen, but I had asked the Operational Assurance Department to review this document, and I know they did do it. And I believe that there were some recommendations that went to the operational, the Operational Improvement Board around, I think, what you called highly insulated buildings. Now, that postdates my time in the fire service, so I'm aware that there was a report that went, but I didn't see the outcome of this review from the Operational Assurance Department and/or the IMPD report that potentially came out of this review because I'd already left the organisation.
Right. Let's just explore that a little bit then, in the light of that. Your covering email, as you have seen, made particular reference to extracts from the BRE Global Report. I've read you that, and you said it may be worthy of inclusion in future IMPD reports to ODCB. In fact, the extracts from the BRE report are, or some of them, are in this document, the ones you drew attention to in your email, and we need to see those at page 12, if we go to that. If you go to that page and look halfway down the page, you'll see some italic text. Under the heading BRE Global Report, you say, and I'll read you the part above the italics, probably easier. The BRE Global work, reviewed in the chapter titled Understanding the Fire, highlighted a number of issues which BRE Global and WFRS are of the opinion need further consideration. These are taken from the Matters Arising from this Programme of Work section of the BRE Global Report on Aphiston on Sturt incident for Warwickshire Fire and Rescue Service. And then it's a quotation, 17.1, highly insulated buildings, and this is a quotation from the BRE Global Report. And it says this, I'll read it to you. Highly insulated buildings are becoming increasingly popular as a means of reducing the energy consumption of buildings. BRE Global's sustainability experts are heavily involved in the development and certification of highly insulated buildings of all sizes, ranging from domestic properties through to commercial offices, industrial buildings and warehouses. The popularity of these buildings is driven by the sustainability agenda, which currently carries far more interest in the construction industry and is currently achieving far more rapid development than the fire safety agenda. As the level of insulation afforded to buildings increases, two factors pertaining to the fire are affected. And it goes on. And if we go to the next substantive item on the following page, page 13, you can see it says rapid fire growth. Partly as a side effect of the increased insulation afforded to buildings, but also as a result of changing materials present in and around buildings, rapid fire growth is becoming increasingly common. During the course of carrying out the reconstructions, it was noted that modern fire and rescue service training involves the use of simulator units. These units often show firefighter trainees fires that burn at a steady rate for a considerable period of time. They do not show a fire growing suddenly from a relatively small, well-contained fire to a fire that is engulfing an entire compartment and extending beyond the boundaries of a compartment. As a result, trainees are not necessarily taught how to identify signs and symptoms of impending sudden fire growth and how to respond to these signs and symptoms. Now, given the explicit reference in your own email to these extracts, which are embedded in the learning points, and given the reference to other compartment breaching fires that we've seen, and the defects in training which this brought to your attention in terms, would it be fair to say that it was this information here that was worthy, you thought, of inclusion in future IMPD reports to the ODCB?
Well, my email certainly references this section of the report explicitly. There are obviously other areas in this report that are relevant to the London Fire Brigade, but yeah, I obviously read that, and obviously the fact that there have been 4 fire deaths obviously is very much focuses, as well as, you know, when members of the public die in fire, that's a real focus for us. That's what he exists to do, is obviously save and rescue people and not injure our firefighters in the process. So those 2 sections, yeah, would have caught my interest, and that's why I asked for this report to be further reviewed and to bring forward any recommendations to the ODCB.
Yes, but that information wasn't simply, as you put it, worthy of inclusion. It was downright essential, wasn't it?
Yeah, in the context of commercial premises, we already had a body of training material for commercial buildings, so I knew that, and I'd undertaken that training myself. I've been in charge of highly insulated buildings, but predominantly all commercial. So yeah, it would have been in the context of a commercial structure in terms of this report. But obviously, I know where you're going with this, but I didn't make an explicit link to residential highly insulated buildings.
No. Now, let's look at the response to this email. It comes the same day, 12th November 2014, LFB 3088107. In the second email down on this page, Graham Ellis. That's, I think, it's the same Graham Ellis as we've seen referred to before, isn't it?
That is the same person.
DAC Ellis. He writes to you in response, and also copy to Dr. Bevan and Assistant Commissioner Cotton. And he says this: Sir, I think that you are right in saying that many of the identified lessons have been considered and actioned by the LFB. The need for improved and more frequent operational and command training is something that we will hopefully address further through the ongoing review of IC training. Just pausing there, is that a reference to the continued review by Babcock of the incident command review process?
Yes, I think by this time, Group Manager Phil Butler had joined or returned from his secondment and was starting to work with Graham's team, Graham Ellis's team, and Babcock to assist with that incident command review and the work falling out of that.
Oh, right. Sorry, I got the impression in your evidence earlier that, in fact, he, that is, Group Manager Butler, had returned after you had left.
No, he returned. It was an opportunity. I think maybe even Graham Ellis brought it to my attention that Phil was due to return, and that's when, I can't remember who I discussed it with, probably AC Cotton and Graham, that he would be a real asset to both the incident operational assurance team, but also could straddle the gaps that had been identified at that point with Babcock, which were acknowledged by Babcock, to be fair to them, and Group Manager Butler would be a real asset for both parties to take this piece of work, this important piece of work forward. So I think he returned around October 2014 and probably took up that role immediately on his return.
Now, continuing with the email, he says, does DAC Ellis, they have clearly identified the need for more frequent and enhanced training as operational exposure of staff decreases. A few initial observations are that we should consider an Ops News article of highly insulated buildings, quotes on quotes. We are already seeing examples of compartment fires in modern, well-insulated properties. The challenges associated with firefighting in such premises will no doubt continue to test us, given the unprecedented increase in the development of modern high-rise premises across London. I will have a more detailed look over these findings with the IM team. Now, we know that a CBT package entitled Highly Insulated Buildings was subsequently developed and discussed at the ODCB, although never released. Was that package a result of your conversation with Graham Ellis at around this time, or was that package already in motion at the time of your highlighting these materials in November 2014? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think I remember this correctly. I believe my email and this response to it was the catalyst. I believe from other information that I've seen in preparation for today that the Ops News or the ODCB that considered Graham's IMPD report, apologies for all the abbreviations there, included this topic. And I don't know who was chairing that ODCB because I wasn't there. I'd retired by that stage, but it was agreed that an Ops News article on highly insulated buildings and the associated new training was agreed at that ODCB. So I think I could take some credit for, prompting that piece of work to be done, which ultimately led to ODCB considering these issues as part of their normal business as usual.
Right. And indeed, if we turn to the top of this email run, page 1, we can see that DAC Ellis responds to Adrian Bevan and Danny Cotton on the 27th of November as follows. We've shortlisted fires in highly insulated buildings on the wish list for the next main Ops News, and better and more frequent incident command training is being addressed via the review of ICT. That was the position, was it, when you left in January 2015?
Yeah, that was I hadn't seen this email obviously, but that was my understanding that there would be a piece of work based on the analysis of the Aphiston on Stour incident and other emerging issues that Graham Ellis's team would have picked up in normal business, and that would be brought forward to the meeting of the ODCB in 2015.
Yes. Now, following this email exchange in November 2014, did you take any additional steps to ensure that the lessons to be learned from the Aphiston on Stour incident were embedded within the LFB's operational training?
It was right at you see the dates of the email there, November. It was literally weeks before I retired, so I obviously didn't want to leave the organisation having read this report without me at least starting the process where it would be formally reviewed. So that was my intention, and I believe that subsequently happened. So obviously my intention did result in some consideration of these issues.
Now, I want to turn to a completely different topic, please, communications. And I want to start within that topic with the Lacanal Rule 43 response. And in that, the subtopic of additional radio channels. Now, in general, is it right that the responsibility for incident communications fell under your directorate?
Yes, it did.
In operational policy?
It did.
Yes. And who was it within the directorate that held that responsibility?
The head of operational policy, when I took over as director, was Assistant Commissioner Jim Knighton. He left the organisation in around July 2013, and Deputy Assistant Commissioner Peter Cowap, who was already the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in that department at that time, acted up as head of service for an interim period until such time there was a promotion round. Peter Cowap was successful in that promotion round and was appointed Assistant Commissioner, Head of Operational Policies and Procedures. I can't remember what date he was promoted, but I think it was around the end of 2000, sometime in 2015, I think, or maybe earlier. I can't remember the exact date, but he took over from AC Knighton and then became the Assistant Commissioner in an unbroken sequence. So we had continuity in that department.
And what about Group Manager Jim Acord or Accord?
Yeah, Jim Acord was, as far as I recall, he worked in one of the sort of functional teams within operational policy, and he had responsibility for incident communications. Right.
Now, we have a statement from Dr. Bevan, who was the LFB's Head of Health and Safety, as you've told us, on the question of communications, which he'd given to the Metropolitan Police, and that is at MET 3080505. Can we please go to that? MET 3080505. Thank you. Now, that's the first. That's not it. There it is. Thank you. That's it. And you can see that it's dated the 5th of August 2021. It's a recent statement. And can we go to page 12 in that, please? He says in the second page on that page, page 12, he says, it's my understanding that the incident communications team should lead on specifications, procurement, operational policy and training relating to radios. Between 2013 and 2014, I believe the department was managed by Group Manager Jim Acourt, who is now retired. When he retired, the incident communications team was depleted, and it is my understanding that there wasn't a direct replacement for him. Just pausing there. Did Mr. Acourt's retirement occur while you were still working for the LFB, do you remember?
We're looking at that date, it would suggest he did, but I don't remember him retiring when I was director.
Right. Now, let's go next to LFB 30/42089. This is Commissioner Dobson's letter in response to the Lakenal House Coroner's Rule 43 letter of the 28th of March. And this letter is dated the 23rd of May 2013. And can we go to page 8 in it? We can see at the top of the page that the coroner made recommendation 5. And I want to read that to you in terms. It says this: it is recommended that the Brigade consider whether it would be beneficial to use additional breathing apparatus radio communications channels and personal radio channels at major incidents to reduce the amount of traffic on each channel. And under the heading response, the LFB said this in the second paragraph. If you look at it, it says, the use of a single BA radio channel allows for the safe monitoring and overview of risk-critical, safety-critical and general information to and from BA teams. The use of separate channels would make it more difficult to maintain this complete overview and may result in a delay in exchanging critical information. For example, by using a single channel, the transmission of risk-critical information relating to a phase or emergency evacuation of a BA crew can be heard and appropriate action taken by all concerned. Multiple channel use could also lead to a lack of coordination between teams and increase the risk that the firefighting actions of a team on one channel might adversely affect teams on another. The need to pass information across multiple channels may negate any perceived benefit because of the requirement to retransmit all relevant information across the channels in use. The result would be to reduce the amount of radio capacity and create further possibilities for duplication and confusion. And the next paragraph summarises the introduction of BA telemetry, and the last paragraph says this: having carefully considered the recommendation, the Brigade is firmly of the view that the risks associated with using more than one BA channel during an incident would outweigh the benefits that this operational practice would afford. Now, I think earlier in your evidence you told us that you and the other members of the Commissioners' group met to discuss how the Brigade should respond to the Rule 43 recommendations. And I think we saw a meeting invitation for the 14th of May 2013.
That's correct.
Yes, which followed on from the 11th of May 2013 emails that we saw.
That's
now,
correct.
Are you able to summarise for the panel the discussions that were had in relation to this recommendation at that meeting?
I can't recall them verbatim, but it would have been along the lines of what you've just read out to me. I believe when the Rule 43 recommendation came in around incident communications, there was a risk assessment process undertaken to look at the risks versus benefits of introducing additional breathing apparatus channels into service, and this is the conclusion of that risk assessment. And I think the board were comfortable. A number of the board are senior operational officers who've got a lot of operational experience, and I think from memory we all felt that this was a sensible approach in terms of BA, particularly the fact that we were also introducing BA telemetry, which would further reduce the voice traffic on the radio system that's used specifically for breathing apparatus crews.
Was there any discussion about personal radio channels at all, or was the discussion all about BA channels, breathing apparatus channels?
The recommendation primarily focused because of what had happened at Lakenal. There were some issues with BA comms at Lakenal from memory. So the substantive element of the Rule 43 was focused on BA, but not exclusively. It does touch on incident ground communication. So this was the one we focused on, and as part of the response to this particular Rule 43, we also undertook to introduce additional training for fireground radios.
Yes, my question was really whether there was any discussion you can recall about the topic of personal radio channels at major incidents, as well as discussion about the use of additional breathing apparatus, radio comms.
I can't honestly recall, in meetings, 8 or 9 years ago now, the detail of the discussion, but it would have been along the lines of this, and I can't confirm 100% sure that we talked about in fireground radio, but I'm sure it was part of the rounder discussion in terms of incident communications.
The response that I've read to you, I haven't read it all to you, but the response I've read to you focuses on the use of additional BA radio channels, breathing apparatus radio channels, but doesn't address the use of additional personal radio channels, which we saw was mentioned in the coroner's recommendation. Why was that?
I think we did undertake, well, I know we undertook to develop some 2 training packages, as I recall, but I don't believe we discussed the introduction of additional radio channels. I think you may be aware already that the spectrum of radio frequency isn't set by the fire service, it's set by a government department, and within that spectrum for fireground radios there are a number of UHF ultra high frequency radio channels that we can deploy, and I think from memory I think we had 8 or 9 potential channels we could use, and so we already used 2 channels for incident command, and I won't go into the detail of that, I will if you want me to. We had 2 channels for BA already, one to be used in normal fireground use and one when there's a base station repeater, and again I can explain what that is if that assists the inquiry. And then there were some other channels which the command unit crews used, and there were some spare channels which were used for teamwork, teams, firefighter in teams could use channel 3, for example. So we didn't have a lot of scope in terms of spare channels, and the reason that is a problem is when you use certain channels concurrently, they actually block each other out because they're so close on the spectrum.
This is a long answer to, I think...
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to help with the context.
Well, yeah, we'll come to the allocation question shortly. It's really a simple question. Here we have the recommendation, which not only relates to additional breathing apparatus radio comms, but also personal radio comms, but your response doesn't address personal radio comms at all. It's completely silent about it. My question is, why is that?
I can't answer that, but I think there's another part to this, isn't there, in terms that we did commit in the response to the Rule 43 action that we would do some further work and publish some further information in terms of training materials on fireground radios. So
we'll come to what did happen shortly, but I'm just interested in this letter.
Yeah, I accept the words. I won't contest that anymore. That doesn't cover incident communications. This covers BA.
So that leads to the next question: why did you not give the coroner an explanation in this letter for why you had decided not to discuss personal radios?
I can't remember the discussion we had around that. I'm afraid. Sorry.
Now we looked at the pro formas, the Rule 43 pro formas, this morning and indeed yesterday, which were created by your department. Now I want to go back to that at LFB 3034062. This is the first document that you got in, I think, August 2013.
I think it's before that, isn't it?
Maybe before that.
Because the response was the 23rd of May to the coroner, so this would have been...
You were putting it together, I think.
We were putting, this was the working document we discussed yesterday that ultimately fed into the commissioners, Ron Dobson, the commissioner at the time, response to the coroner.
Yes. Now, can we go to page 9? Yes, page 9, please. And there you can see the recommendation at the top of the page, top of your screen, where it's in the text that we've seen, in fact, reproduced faithfully in the Ron Dobson letter. Then you identify the policy documents currently in place within the LFB, and then you could see you say the following considerations and options were explored to meet the recommendation. In the larger block of text, first paragraph in the yellow there, you say this. The current use of LFB radio channels was assessed and opportunities for additional channel programming for different applications was identified for the current radio system. The use of different BA UHF radio channels at the same incident is possible. Unused channels are also potentially available for use. However, the hazards and risks associated with this practice would be significant. BA teams on separate channels would be unable to communicate with each other, and the passing of risk-critical information would be complicated by the need to transmit over different channels simultaneously. The level of control and supervision would need to be significantly increased. Now, just pausing there, I just want to examine that a little bit with you before coming back to the rest of this text shortly. The opening line to this paragraph reads, and I've just read it, I'll just show it to you again. The current use of LFB radio channels was assessed, and opportunities for additional channel programming for different applications was identified for the current radio system. Now, there's nothing there to suggest that that analysis was restricted to breathing apparatus radio channels, is there?
No, that's correct.
Did that assessment that's referred to there consider additional radio channels for crews who were not using breathing apparatus, i.e. for the handheld radios?
I believe it did.
It did. Do you know what was considered?
Beyond what I just said with the availability of channel and the potential for blocking if you use two channels concurrently, as I can only repeat what I said, we've got two command channels. That was the kind of default position. Channel 3 of the 9 that it mentions here was available for firefighting teams to use as a sort of self-contained team. I can't remember if we used Channel 4. Channel 5 and 6 were BA channel, and I think Channel 8 was used by command unit crews, leaving Channel 9, which was previously I think from memory, it was a multi-agency channel used by the police, and they gifted it to the fire service when they moved over to.
But you're talking about how the channels are used. My question is different, which was well, let me try it differently. What was the outcome of the assessment of the current use of LFB radio channels, so far as personal radios are concerned?
That the provision as the default position, as I've just described, that channel 1 and 2 for command was sufficient for incident command, with the addition of, because we also had airwave radios, which isn't mentioned here, but we did have airwave radios as well. Now,
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn to a document which looks in detail at these channel allocations.
You're going to say it'd be sensible to stop at this point?
Yeah, we'd probably benefit from a break before we do it.
Right, well, it's a little earlier than usual, but I think that would be a sensible point at which to take a break.
Thank you.
So we'll stop there and come back, please, at 3:30.
Yeah.
And again, please don't discuss your evidence with anyone while you're out of the room.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 3:30 then, please. Thank you. Yes, would you ask Mr. Reason to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Reason?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reason, I want now to show you what AC Ellis has said, Dominic Ellis, this is not Graham, relating to the LFB's incident communications. Can we go, please, to his statement at LFB 30899131? This is his statement of the 6th of February 2020. And if we go to paragraph 26 on page 7, at the foot of that page, we see he says this: there were 10 separate channels loaded onto UHF radios on 14th June 2017. The channels were Channel 1, used primarily for incident ground communications and the primary incident command and control channel. Channel 2, an additional incident command channel which is used if there is too much traffic on Channel 1. It is commonly referred to as a duplex channel. You've turned the page. Please note the explanation of this term above and can only be used with a repeater. Channel 3, used by a team for a specific task, for example, water sector or line operations. This channel can only be used on the instruction of the IC or sector commander. This is to ensure that the IC retains control of the channel plan at an incident and can arrange monitoring if necessary. Now, just pausing there, is it right that Channel 3 would be used at the same time as Channel 1?
Yes, I believe it could be.
Yeah. Does that mean that the LFB had prior experience of using specific radio channels for specific tasks alongside the general fireground channel, Channel 1?
Yes.
Continuing with Mr. Ellis's explanation at D, he says Channel 4, not generally in use at the time of the fire due to potential interference with Channel 6. This channel was used if more capacity was required because of excess traffic on other channels and was only to be used after consultation with the duty radio officer. Why, in the wake of the Coroner's Rule 43 recommendation, did your directorate not give consideration to increasing the use of Channel 4 to combat excess traffic?
I suspect because of the potential for interference with Channel 6, which is the BA radio channel.
You suspect that, but do you know it?
I can't remember the specific detail, and apologies, I went into quite a lot of this detail in my answer. I didn't know you was going to come to this. So the reason we had the working draft of the draft Rule 43 response was to stimulate this type of discussion. So not all of the members who were at that meeting that discussed the Rule 43 were operational officers, and that's why we added a lot of that detail so that when we started to discuss it, everyone had the same understanding of these types of issues.
And what work, if any, did your directorate do to address the issue of interference across the channels?
I think that's a facet of the radio spectrum. I'm not a technical expert in radio spectrums, but that's my understanding of what that point D is referring to. They're very close in terms of the radio spectrum, so when you're transmitting or receiving on Channel 4 and Channel 6, there is a potential for interference.
We then see at paragraphs E and F, Channel 5 and Channel 6, he says at E, Channel 5 used for communications using a repeater or a leaky feeder, commonly referred to as a duplex channel. Please note the explanation of this term above, and can only be used with a repeater. Channel 5 was the default channel for BA communications using a repeater. F, Channel 6, the BA communications channel. This is the channel used to communicate with IS equipment. Channel 6 transmits at 1 watt, whereas Channel 1, for example, transmits at 4 watts. The lower wattage reduces the risk of creating a spark, which could ignite an explosive atmosphere. Now, just to summarise that, the Channel 6 was the default radio channel for BA wearers. Is this right? But they could move to Channel 5 if radio repeaters and leaky feeders were deployed?
Yeah, on the instruction of the incident commander, that if a leaky feeder or base station repeater is available, they could move to Channel 5, but 6 is the default channel.
Right. Now, how are risks of multiple channels and transitions between channels, such as the risks of teams communicating on different channels and missing critical information, how are those risks managed or mitigated in a case of a move from Channel 6 to Channel 5?
I say it would be on the express instruction of an incident commander if a base station is available. All London Underground stations have got base stations so that we can communicate subsurface, and it would be a decision for the incident commander to manage the transition. And normally the way that would work is you would change it before you committed crews, so you didn't have crews on multiple channels if possible. And that wasn't always possible, but that's how it would be managed.
Right. Now then we've got channels 7 to 11. They're set out. Channel 7 not used by LFB at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire. This was a police interagency channel owned and managed by the police and used for interoperability between the Metropolitan Police Service, MPS in London, and the LFB. And he goes on to say the police now use airwave radio and gifted Channel 7 along with Channel 8 to all fire and rescue services, etc. He says Channel 7 is now used by the LFB if more capacity is required because there's excess traffic on other channels, and is only to be used after consultation with the duty radio officer. Channel 8 not generally in use by the LFB at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, although it's sometimes used for communications using a repeater or leaky feeder, for example, the fixed leaky feeder system in the Shard building. Like Channel 7, this was a police interagency channel which was subsequently gifted to fire and rescue services. This is a duplex channel. Please note the explanation of this term above and can only be used with a repeater. There's no Channel 9. Channel 10, used by command unit crews for inter-crew communications. This is a dedicated channel due to the normally large amount of command unit-specific radio traffic at an incident. Now, and then we got over the page, Channel 11, that's Heathrow Airport.
Yep.
So that summary there, that's correct, is it?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Are the two channels that were gifted to the LFB, Channel 7 and 8, those were gifted after the Grenfell Tower fire, were they?
I don't know when they were gifted. I suspect it was before, if it was, as I understand it, after the police started using digital radio, airwave radio system.
If it was before, can you tell us why they weren't used before the Grenfell Tower fire, as they weren't?
Because I suspect that we had a discussion at that meeting and we drew the conclusion that Channel 1 and Channel 2 for Incident Command, with the other channels that are used as described in Mr. Ellis's statement, was sufficient for incident communications.
Right. How did you judge sufficiency? What was your yardstick against which you were making that decision?
Well, incident communications, from my own perspective, I can only answer it in my own perspective, I don't think had featured predominantly in any of the IMPD reports brought forward to ODCB when I was director. Comms obviously is a key component of incident command, but I don't remember seeing any trends that we had an issue with communications. And indeed, I chaired the performance review of command for Lacanau, and I don't recall any of the officers mentioning any significant comms issue in terms of command and control at the Lacanau House fire.
No, but the coroner did, hence recommendation 5.
I accept that, but and we would have taken all of that into consideration, I suspect, in terms of reaching the decision that the existing radio allocation and usage was sufficient at the time that we took the decision.
Right. Well, let's then go back to the communications pro forma we looked at a moment ago at LFB 34062, page 10. And at the bottom half of this page, we can see row D with your proposal. We propose to address the Rule 43 recommendation by the following actions. And then you see in the main box 4 bullet points. You see that?
Yes.
And the third bullet point reads as follows: consider the possibility of using additional legacy police interagency analogue radio frequencies. These are no longer utilised by the police and are already programmed into all of the brigade's analogue handheld radios. Did your directorate do anything to progress that proposal?
No, because when this is a working draft, as you recall, and I think the final draft response to the coroner didn't include that recommendation, or that response, really.
Yes, so why not?
I can't remember the specifics of that meeting, but we would have obviously discussed it given the volume of information there and the fact it was a proposal or an option to take forward, and obviously the decision of that group was not to take that particular issue forward. I can't remember the detail of that meeting discussion, though. I'm sorry.
We may be at cross purposes. Was the possibility of using additional legacy police interagency analogue radio frequencies actually considered?
Well, it's here, so this was the report that went to that meeting, so everyone would have read the report. We would have discussed all the components of this report, so probably the answer is yes to that.
Well, you say it was. I mean, the fact that it's in this document doesn't tell us that as a response to this document, consideration was in fact given to that possibility. Was it in fact given to that possibility?
This whole document was designed to give that commissioners group plus the heads of service that were responsible for most of these actions the opportunity to discuss and consider whether they were going to put forward those 4 bullet points. And I don't believe all 4, well, I know all 4 didn't go forward.
They didn't go forward. Were they considered?
Yes.
Right. Why did this work, or why did the reason for this not being taken forward not feature in the LFB's response to the coroner's Rule 43 letter? Do you know?
I can't remember the detail of that discussion. I'm sorry, Mr. Millett.
All right. Now, let's go back to LFB 3091880. This is an email we looked at yesterday together. It's the email of the 11th of May 2013 to Ron Dobson, Rita Dexter, and Sue Budden. And other senior officers. I'm sorry, we're looking at page 1. This is my fault. We want page 3. Can we go to that? It's your email of that date to those individuals. And it attached the Lacknell Rule 43 pro formas ahead of discussions to finalise the reply to the Lacknell House coroner, which we saw yesterday. So this is the 11th of May. We had their meeting on the 14th of May, and then the letter goes out on the 23rd of May. And if we go to the bottom of page 2 and start there, you can see that Sue Budden forwards the email to Julian Martin. And at the top of page 3, she says, "You may already be aware of this, Julian, but one of the recommendations from the Lacknell inquest related to radio use. The recommendation and the proposed response is set out in the attached. I think it starts on page 8. Let me know if you have any comments or concerns." First, what was Julian Martin's role at that time?
He was the head of information technology, so computers and the Brigade's infrastructure, IT infrastructure.
Right. He describes himself, I think, as the Chief Information Officer, or CIO. Is that
that was, he probably became that.
Yes. Now, can you shed any light on why Sue Budden might have been contacting him in particular for his comments or concerns on this topic?
I think with regards to incident communications, there was a bit of a straddle of responsibility. So Julian, in the role you've just described in terms of his job description, also had responsibility for the Brigade's IT infrastructure, and I think he also looked after the physical procurement of radios and associated radio equipment. So I think Sue Budden would have been informing him that the policy part of the organisation was recommending something that potentially had an impact on his part of and his responsibilities. I suspect that's why she shared my email with him.
I see. The next email up in the chain at the bottom of page 1, which is where it starts, is from Julian Martin back to Sue Budden on the 21st of May 2013. And that's only 2 days or so before the 23rd of May letter goes out to the coroner from Ron Dobson. And he says this: "Sue, I've collated comments received as follows. Consider the possibility of using additional legacy police interagency analogue radio frequencies. These are no longer utilised by the police and are already programmed into all of the Brigade's analogue handheld radios." And then over the page, he says, "We've made contact with Ofcom in relation to this. Initial thoughts are that it wouldn't be a problem, but we are awaiting confirmation from the appropriate office at Ofcom. I would advise further as soon as this is received." Do you know whether Ofcom sent a response?
I don't, sorry.
it would look from reading Julian Martin's comments that this idea was an easy one to implement. Is that fair?
In terms of radio capacity and the channels are available, yes.
Now, we looked at Dominic Ellis's statement at length a moment ago when he described channels 7 and 8 as being legacy police channels not generally used by the LFB at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, but now used in the event that extra capacity is required. Do you agree in general terms that it would have been possible for those channels to have been adopted and used in that way during your time at the LFB?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Do you know why your directorate didn't take steps to acquire and use those frequencies at that time, now having shown you this email?
Yeah, I hadn't seen this email, to be fair. I think I was aware of most of those issues, that it was technically possible to use them. I can only conclude that the discussions at the meeting where we looked at the working draft of the Rule 43 response is that the decision was taken that we wouldn't pursue using the 2 channels that had been gifted to us or to the fire service by the Metropolitan Police.
Right. Did Sue Budden raise this at the meeting?
I can't remember the specific discussion meeting that happened sort of 8 years ago, I'm sorry.
Did she say to you at the meeting that she'd contacted Julian Martin and was waiting for a response from him?
She probably would have done if she'd entered into these correspondence with Julian. She would have raised these issues, I'm pretty certain.
But you don't know whether during the 2 days between his email back to her on the 21st of May and the 23rd of May, Sue Budden basically said, "Stop press, I've got something in from Julian Martin about channels 7 and 8.
No, I don't recall any discussion or emails about that.
Let's then go back to the pro forma again, please. LFB 3034062, page 10. And go back down to the row of bullets under D. This time I want to look at the second bullet point. We looked at the third one, and I want to look at the second bullet point. Exercise the use of fire survival guidance, FSG procedure, including the use of a dedicated UHF command channel for the passing of FSG information. What became of that suggestion? Do you know?
That was actually progressed. It was progressed through Dave Brown's directorate, so it didn't involve Babcock, and there was a programme of exercises at the Fire Service Control Centre, which at that time was based in Merton, and the programme of exercises involved a command unit, which obviously undertake the fire survival guidance function at incidents, station manager, and obviously the control staff. And there was an exercise to familiarise the command units and senior officers with the work of control, which was another one of the pieces of work we did post Lacanal, but also to practice passing fire survival guidance information between control and the command unit. And obviously the senior officer was there because one of the changes we made after Lacanal was to mobilise a dedicated station manager specifically to manage fire survival information at the incident and make sure it was passed back to control.
Right. Now, we've been provided with a copy of a PowerPoint presentation at LFB 3084606, which I just want to ask you about. It's a presentation for an operational procedures briefing day on the 4th of December 2014. First of all, can you help us? Were these briefing days regular occurrences?
I'd need a bit more information. I've not seen this presentation, I don't think.
Right.
Is it? Sorry. Oh.
Well, let me try and help you. Let's go to the timetable at page 5. See if this triggers a recollection. If we can expand that, please. You can see from the timetable that you are the first person to speak from 9:30 to 10:15.
Yes, I know what this is now.
Right. Now, then coming back to my question, were these briefing days regular occurrences?
I think they were generally undertaken annually. I don't think they were like formally diarised annually, but it was really for the head of the department to call it was almost like an end of year wash up, look forward to what's happening, what's the challenges coming up in the next year, to share information between the different teams within, in this case, operational procedures. And I think I was there to open the the day and talk about probably some corporate issues around, probably at this time was LSP5 implementation and things like that, so to give a more sort of strategic overview of what was going on in the brigade and the direction of travel.
Right. You don't remember what the precise topic of your address was, do you?
It would have been, I would have been invited by the head of service to open their sort of their team building day, if you want to call it that, and I would have had probably a PowerPoint presentation to just touch on issues that I was aware of at a strategic level, which maybe the lower rank officers wouldn't have been aware of, and do a bit of team building and a bit of visibility, leadership, and to give them a feel for what the the next year is looking like in terms of challenges and opportunities.
Now, if you look at the next item down, you have operational procedures, AC Cowap and DAC to Kevin Hughes, and then after that, at 10:45 to 11:05. On the timetable, Jim Acourt speaks about incident communications. And we can go to slide 19. We go to slide 19, please, and page 19. That's where Jim Acourt's incident comms talk starts. The world of incident comms. That's the second page, page 20. And there's lots of stuff there to enjoy. And then at page 24, you go to page 24, the world of incident comms and R&D, exclamation mark. What's next? And if you look at the fourth bullet point down, it says, new channel for radio in high-rise. What were those plans to introduce a new radio channel specifically for use in high-rise buildings?
I wasn't in attendance for the whole of this day. I only opened the session and then I would have left the meeting, and this is the first time I've seen it, so I don't know what the context of that new channel for radio high-rise is.
Well, did nobody tell you? I mean, never mind about whether you were still at the presentation, but did nobody actually tell you that a new channel for radio in high-rise was being proposed?
I don't know if that is the context in what that means. That's what it says, but whether there's a context to that, I don't know.
Well, true, it is a slide, but the question is a simple one based on a simple and pretty unambiguous statement. New channel for radio in high-rise. What other context could it be, or what else could it mean other than that there was a new channel which was being explored for radio use in high-rise buildings?
I don't know the context of it, I'm sorry.
Right. Was there any discussion during your work on the Rule 43 responses at this stage to having a new channel for radio in high-rise buildings?
I don't remember. There was some talk about a dedicated channel for passing fire survival guidance, which was included in Policy Note 790 when that was updated, which is the fire survival guidance policy note. But I'm not aware of any discussions, and certainly not in consultation with the head of service for this department, that there was any work being done to, as that indicates, to look at a potential additional channel or new channel for radio communications in high-rise.
Right. We know that there was a trial run of Policy 790, and there was a pilot, I think, wasn't there? And there was feedback from that. Was this linked to that?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think 790 is specifically about passing, well, it could be actually, thinking about it. It was passing information from control to the fire survival guidance command unit and obviously back to control, and then the information about casualties that are trapped in terms of a designated fire survival call would need to go to the bridgehead. Yes.
Do you know what happened to the proposal to have a specific FSG channel?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
We know that it was never implemented.
It certainly wasn't implemented when I was working, no.
Do you know why it wasn't implemented?
I don't remember seeing anything brought forward formally to either my Directorate Manager Board, ODCB, or any of the boards that would have taken this sort of proposal. If we were going to do something like that, there would have been a definitive report that explained what we were proposing, what the implications are, etc., what the training dependencies would be. We wouldn't just implement it without some sort of formal sign-off.
Now, I want to turn next to a different topic within the broader topic of Rule 43 response on comms, and that's radio transmission strength. We saw that the Coroner's Rule 43 recommendations were that the LFB should consider additional radio channels. Can we go back to the Incident Communications Rule 43 pro forma at LFB 303406.2, and this time start at page 9? And let's look at the last paragraph on that page. On the left-hand side, it says the following considerations and options were explored to meet the recommendation. And then it says, in the second paragraph, in yellow there, the transmission strength of an analogue radio increases the stability to transmit over distance and through some obstructions. There are currently two types of analogue radio, intrinsically safe, IS, and non-IS. The transmission strengths for non-IS equipment range between 1 and 4 watts. All IS analogue radios attached to BA sets are programmed to 1 watt in order to meet intrinsic safety certification. Current guidance from the Chief Fire Officers Association stipulates that all radio equipment attached to a BA set should be IS certified. Radio coverage can be enhanced by the use of an analogue radio repeater, which can be further improved by the attachment of a leaky feeder cable. Additional repeaters can be deployed to increase the area covered. This equipment is carried on command units, CUs, and by the duty radio officer. Now, is it right that, in summary, an intrinsically safe, or IS, radio is a radio that will not provide an ignition source in an explosive environment?
That is correct.
What kind of explosive environments might firefighters have to operate in?
Any flammable atmospheres, so that could be gas leak, it could be the products of a fire. If the fire hasn't reached its auto ignition temperature, you could introduce a spark which would be within the flammable range of the smoke gases, which could then create a flashover or fully developed fire. And some chemical hazmat incidents where when the chemicals are gassing off, they can be flammable. They're kind of main, there's probably a whole load more, but they're the kind of main flavour of what the risks are.
Right. Is it the case then that BA radios are specifically designed to be weaker so that they are appropriate for use in potentially explosive environments?
That is correct.
Yes. Now, there's no proposal in this pro forma here at all. What was being considered in relation to the transmission strength of radios?
I don't believe we were discussing the technical specification of radios in this meeting.
In the meeting? That's the meeting of...
Yeah, and indeed this is, I think this is for information for the audience who may not have that knowledge when we were discussing this topic.
Yeah. Now, turning to, or returning to Dominic Ellis's statement to the inquiry, can we go back to that? This is at LFB 3089131. And we can go to page 9 in that. If we look at paragraph 28 on that page, he says, these radios share the limitations common to all UHF radios. Radio signal penetration can be hampered by metal-framed buildings, thick concrete layers, and thick smoke. The higher the wattage, the better the signal penetration. The Home Office regulates the power output allowed within British Fire Service radios. In line with the Home Office regulations, the LFB's Channel 1 transmits at 4 watts, and Channels 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 10 transmit at 2 watts. There is considerably lower power on Channel 6, the BA channel, as set out above. Channel 6 transmits at 1 watt, while the lower wattage on Channel 6 limits the energy available for ignition in an explosive atmosphere. The trade-off is a decrease in the potential range. Please note that the HX480 and HX481 are not IS. Now, just reading that, is it right that not only were the LFB's BA radios, breathing apparatus radios, limited in power so as to be IS, intrinsically safe, but also the radio channels themselves were programmed so as to transmit at a different power?
Yeah, that is accurate,
yeah,
as I understand it.
And as Mr. Ellis says here, is it right, Channel 1, the incident command channel, has the highest power at 4 watts. Channel 6, the BA channel, has the lowest power at 1 watt. And everything else transmits at 2 watts.
That is correct.
Right. Now, Dominic Ellis has also provided a statement to the police in October last year, and that is at MET 30s 77839. If we can just go to that. There we go at the first page, 22nd of October 2020 is the date of the statement. Could we please go to page 9? And in the second paragraph on that page, Mr. Ellis says this: the reasons why the channels other than 1 and 6 are 2 watt are somewhat difficult to explain. This was the transmitting power of the channels of the Maxon radio, HX 480/1's predecessor, and it is assumed that this was due to battery power, as the higher the wattage, the greater the draw on the battery. The reasons that the HX 480 and 81 used the same power outputs, even though the batteries had improved, was probably because it was not considered at the time that greater output was required. However, LFB personnel who worked in this area have since retired, as this was 12 years ago. Now, do you remember when the LFB Maxon radios were phased out and replaced by the HX 480 and HX 481?
It happened while I was still working, but I can't give you a date for that, I'm sorry.
Was it before or after the Bethnal Green fire, which was in July 2004?
I would imagine that the newer radios that replaced the Maxon radios happened after Bethnal Green, but I can't be 100% certain on that. That's just what I recall. I'm trying to remember when I got issued.
Are you able to shed any further light on why the wattage of a number of the radio channels, so 2, 3, 4, 7, 8 and 10, remained limited to 2 watts following the replacement of the Maxon radio?
That's the first time I've seen that. I didn't know that was a potential reason why they were set at 2 watts.
Right. You don't know why?
No, that's the first time that's new news to me.
Right. I mean, is it right? I mean, do you accept that that limitation would have negatively affected any crews who were not communicating on either the incident command channel or the BA channel?
Yeah, because it's a lower wattage.
It's a lower wattage, yes. Now, we've got an earlier draft of the Communications Rule 43 pro forma. Let's just look at it. LFB 30s98636. This is a draft sent, I should just tell you, from Jim Acorte to Assistant Commissioner Jim Knighton. And we have a covering email for it. I don't think I need to take you to it, but it's at LFB 30s98635. This is an earlier draft of what we've been looking at. As you told us earlier, Assistant Commissioner James Knighton was, I think, then head of operational procedures.
That's correct.
And this document was sent on the 30th of April 2013. So that would be consistent with what you've told us about the timing of when this pro forma or draft document was created by those downstream of you.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, this pro forma says this, if you go to page, bottom of page 1 and over to page 2. At the very bottom of page 1, you can see some italics, which say this: transmission strength of analogue radios. For non-intrinsically safe radios, this has already been raised to improve the transmission distance of the radios. You see that?
Yep.
And then it goes on over the page. Intrinsically safe radios are limited to a maximum power output of 1 watt, so this cannot be increased. However, the need for IS radios could be re-examined, as when entering premises with a non-explosive risk, or where a fire is already present, the requirement for IS equipment is not necessary. The requirement is still present when entering potentially explosive atmospheres. Now, I mean, translating that into something perhaps a little clearer, what's being said here, and please disagree with me if you do, is that the risk of a radio providing a source of ignition is irrelevant in a residential high-rise fire because a fire is already underway, and thus the risk of ignition does not apply.
I don't accept that.
You don't?
Do you want me to explain why?
Please.
So I accept that if you're in or near a fire compartment that is involved in fire, the most significant risk of fire is the fire itself in terms of ignition source. But of course, crews are not exclusively working in the fire compartment. They're working in other parts of the building. which may be smoke logged. There may be gas leaks caused by the fire or the incident itself. And certainly we do have equipment to test flammable range, but not on frontline fire engines. So in the immediate response, we wouldn't be able to confirm that the environment in which the BA crews are being committed is not a flammable atmosphere or an explosive atmosphere, to use the term in this document. So absolutely accept it. If you're in the fire compartment, the fire itself is obviously the ignition source, but of course, as we know from other fires, compartments fail, smoke, products of combustion leach into other parts of the building. Sometimes you have gas leaks caused by the fire itself that then permeate the building, and their firefighters will be working in other parts of that structure, which then could be exposed to an explosive atmosphere.
Let me show you what Dr. Bevan says about that. Can we go, please, to MET 3080505? This is Dr. Bevan's statement to the Metropolitan Police, which I think we've looked at before. And it's dated the 5th of August 2021. Can we go to page 4, please, in that document? He says in the first paragraph, he's dealing with this question, and he says in the third line up from the bottom, we also knew from previous experience that an ignition source would usually already be present when firefighters were attending a building which was already on fire, i.e. the fire itself or any smouldering embers, which would be a better ignition source than a functioning radio set. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
That is true, and it's similar in response, well, not as extensive in response to my previous answer, but yeah, in principle, yes, of course, a fire and the smouldering embers would be a bigger risk of ignition source than a functioning radio in the fire compartment.
Yes. And therefore, it's possible that, isn't it, that where there is already a fire in progress, the risk of ignition caused by a spark from a radio is very much less, without trying to quantify it, less than the risk which already exists from the fire itself and embers. Less
In the fire compartment and area surrounding the fire compartment, yes, but not necessarily in other parts of the structure.
Yes, I see. Okay, can we then go back to the pro forma, please, at LFB 3098636 on page 2. And in fact, I think we want the very bottom of page 1, where the first line of the update says, for non-intrinsically safe radios, this has already been raised to improve the transmission distance of the radios. Do you remember, or do you know when that was raised?
No, sorry, I can't help you with that.
Don't know by whom it was raised?
I assume it will be a technical issue, so it'd probably be Julian Martin, but he wouldn't have done that without someone telling him to do that.
Right. Did that apply only to channel 1, which performed at the higher wattage of 4 watts?
I don't know the context of this. I think the inference is that the other channels that are not non-IS channels could also have their transmission strength raised.
Yes, and that leads to the question, what consideration was actually given at the time to increasing the wattage of the other channels up to 4 watts?
I don't believe there was any consideration.
Why is that?
I didn't know the reason why the other channels were transmitting and receiving on 2 watts. I assume that was something to do with the either the radio spectrum or the radio itself. I didn't know there was the ability or capacity to increase the signal strength on those channels. That's a very technical sort of aspect of the job that I wouldn't have been involved in.
Now, the final line to this update says, if we just go back to page 2, and I've read it to you already, I'll read it again. However, the need for IS radios could be re-examined as when entering premises with a non-explosive risk or where the fire is already present, the requirement for IS equipment is not necessary. The requirement is still present when entering potentially explosive atmospheres. That sentence there wasn't replicated in the final pro forma, was it?
No.
No. Do you know why that was?
I don't believe I saw this version, so this, I assume, would have been a discussion between Jim Knight and the head of service and Jim McCourt before their final version was put forward.
Had you ever yourself given consideration to the idea as set out here?
Not specifically, because I think we would have followed national guidance, which was that BA crews need IS radios. I don't think we would have gone away from that. And being realistic, I think I won't speak on behalf of the Fire Brigade Union, but I think the Fire Brigade Union would have a serious issue with moving away from IS radios.
Do you recall the weak transmitting strength of BA radios being a problem at the Lacknell House fire?
I reviewed the performance review of command, and I know you've got the notes of that meeting. I don't believe incident comms was an issue. I know there was a report produced following Lacknell specifically around incident communications, which was commissioned by, I think, Health and Safety with one of the radio officers at the time, Roger Tuckley. I wasn't in the director post, and I wasn't in a position to see the progression of that work or the outcome of that work, but I understand there was a review done specifically around fireground radios and BA radios as a discrete piece of work immediately following the Lacknell House fire.
Yes. Well, that is something we're going to investigate in a little bit of detail next, if I may, but it's not something I can finish this evening, and I'm not sure I'm going to get to an intelligible natural break before 4:30.
It sounds to me, Mr. Millett, as though it would be more sensible to pick this up again fresh tomorrow.
Yes, it would. It's been a long day for the witness,
Yes.
and I think for others.
Yes. Well, that's all right.
and,
We're making good
maybe-
progress, aren't we?
We're making excellent progress, which is why I'm not uncomfortable about asking
No.
to rise at this point.
Well, Mr. Reason, it's earlier than we would usually rise, but not very much earlier. And
Okay.
it sounds as though we've got a meaty topic coming up, so we'll postpone the pleasure of that
I look forward to that.
till tomorrow. Yes. So we'll break at this point. We'll resume, please, at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And as before, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it during the break. All right?
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Well,
Good evening.
if you'd like to give the usher, that'll be fine. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to raise one thing, and that's Miss Dexter. You'll recall yesterday that we had not released her at the end of her evidence.
Yes.
Having looked at the material further, we are happy to say that she should be released, at least formally, and therefore I'm going to ask you to do that.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And can we arrange for someone to contact her then
Yes.
as soon as possible and tell her that she's released?
Yes,
Because,
Mr. Walsh is in the room here, and he
Yes.
can do that straight away.
right. Well, thank you very much. Right. Well, then she can consider herself formally released. And any bar on discussing things with people is lifted. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
10 o'clock tomorrow then, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.